All right, guys, welcome to yet another edition of Gate 7 International. We have a very special interview today. We have a guest joining us that you may have heard his voice before on a stream of Olympiacos. Maybe you heard him during the Ferencvaros games, whether you were listening to Paramount Plus or maybe you were listening in Europe to the TNT Sports stream. I am joined today by sports commentator James Fielden from the UK. We are really excited to have him here. This is going to be the first interview we've ever done with anybody that's done sports commentary outside of Greece. So, James, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
No problem. Thanks very much for having me on. I mean, you're a great help to me when I was researching the game. So least I could do is come on and have a chat. So yeah, all good here. It's pouring down with rain in London as per. So standard March day.
And thank you for taking the time to do the research on Olympiacos before you were covering them. We actually had gotten comments from the audience saying, "Hey, this guy actually seems to know about Olympiacos," and so we appreciate it. We very much appreciate it, the time that you took to get to know the club and the time that you spent. And you have actually some history with Olympiacos. You've covered them in the past, and we're going to get into that very shortly. James, we'd like to start, as we do with all of our guests, we'd like to learn about your background in football, whether you played growing up, when did your interest start in the sport? Tell us about your background in football.
Yeah. So I was born in '88, and I went to my first match in '97, which probably for most people is a little bit old actually. It was the 1st of November 1997, and yeah, I didn't really come from a footballing supporting family as such. My mum's side are all big fans of Cambridge United, a lower league side in England, and dad's side of the family, so I didn't have an interest in football. But all I remember is that one day I was on the playground at lunchtime, and my best mate came up to me and he's like, "Oh, do you want to play football with us?" And I was like, yeah, obviously. I've never played football, but I'd be quite happy to play. And he's like, "Oh, the only condition is that you become a Wolves fan." So that was how I became a Wolves fan in the first place. I mean, I did live within the area, but didn't have any ties to the club or any kind of family connections or anything like that. So that's the earliest that I remember of playing football. And then, yeah, the love for it just grew after that. I used to go to matches with my mom when I was younger, and then had an interest that was growing and growing all the time. So, yeah, it started on the playground and played Sunday league football for kids teams and all the way up to kind of when I was 18, I guess. Never to any great level or even in a decent league, to be honest. But yeah, it was a fairly standard upbringing in football in the end.
So, how did that then translate to football commentary? How did you decide to make that jump and make it a career?
Um, Everyone, especially in this country, and I imagine it's the same in America or in Greece or anywhere really, people might set out with an ambition to be a football commentator, but there's no direct route. You don't see these jobs out, advertised in newspapers, as it were, or on the internet now, or anywhere like that. It just doesn't really happen like that. I did a sports journalism course at Staffordshire University in Stoke, just south of Manchester, and then scratching around trying to look for a job, and saw this advert for a job for video editing, which wasn't technically journalism, but I was looking for a way in, and I applied for it, didn't hear anything back, and then about 5 or 6 days later, after I'd kind of ruled it out in my own mind, this lad called Adam Cottier, who's a commentator now for the BBC and other people based up in the Northwest, he started following me on Twitter, and in his bio it said that he worked for the company that I'd applied for. And so I sent him a DM and I was like, "Oh, hi, appreciate we've never met, but I've applied for this job. Can you give me any pointers on who to speak to or who to chase it up with?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure, no worries, let me get back to you." Anyway, 8 or 9 days later, he comes back to me and says, "Mate, forget that job, it's gone. How would you fancy doing football commentary instead?" And I was like, wow, I mean, I'd love to, it'd be amazing. And he's like, "Right, we'll get you down for this training day. And we'll take it from there." And when I was younger, like me and my best mate, the one who actually got me into football, we used to kind of sit in his bedroom listening to matches on the radio and things like this. I mean, him, I guess, say joked. I mean, at the time we felt we were being serious, but we'd said, one day this will be us, and this would be the dream thing to do every single Saturday. Anyway, I went for this training day. They didn't give me the job, but they said, in the end that they would give me enough games to get by as a freelance if I toned down my accent, which at the time had quite a strong Midlands twang to it for people who were au fait with various English accents. And that was it. I went away for 6 weeks, practiced and practiced and practiced, came back in the summer, and they were like, right, it's fine, let's go with it. And then that was that, and then started in September 2011, and here we are today. So everyone has these weird kind of stories as to how they get into it, because there's just no direct route, but normally it's a favor from someone, or an opportunity opens up one day, and that was it. And then for the first 3, 4, 5, probably even 6 years, a lot of the commentaries I was doing were for a betting service, where the theory was that if these matches were streamed on the bookies' websites and people could watch the matches, they were more inclined to bet on the matches. So we definitely weren't betting. We were commentating on matches basically from every single league that didn't have a rights deal in England. So you wouldn't really have Premier League, Bundesliga, Serie A.
Right.
You might have the second divisions of those leagues or countries, but we were doing a lot of things like Greece, Turkey, China, Japan, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, CONCACAF Champions League. I remember doing loads of Montreal Impact games when they got to the final, I think it was. But I really, really enjoyed it because the variety was just incredible. And you were watching the elite on English TV every week, but you could go and speak to your colleagues and mates and say, "Oh my goodness, I stayed up until 2:00 in the morning on Sunday night watching Boca Juniors against River Plate, and it was the most exhilarating experience." Or you were doing the Intercontinental Derby between Galatasaray and Fenerbahce, or whatever it might have been. You just saw matches that you just weren't going to see on English TV. So for me, it was an amazing experience, and you were able to really learn the job doing that as well, because you could make mistakes and people weren't really going to pull you up on it because of the people it was ultimately going out to. People weren't paying for a commentary service, they were using it for other means. So I was very lucky that I got that experience, because it's not really something that exists so much now for people who want to be commentators. But that's basically where it all began, and then one thing leads to another after that, and you get speaking to people and you get new opportunities. But so I was very lucky at the beginning, but that's how it started.
That's incredible. And is there still commentary on the bet sites directly, or is there more of an appetite for viewership of these other leagues now?
I don't bet, so I don't actually know myself. I think you can still watch some of the games, but it was a crazy situation where you'd be in there doing, let's say, Boca Juniors against River Plate, right? And the layout of this long rectangular room was booth. Normally if you're doing a game off tube, which is commentary speak from a studio instead of being at the stadium, you're
Right.
in an enclosed little space. You've normally got some kind of foam on the walls, or it's soft basically, so the sound gets absorbed. You don't have kind of hard floors or hard walls, because the sound starts bouncing around and causes an echo. But for whatever reason, the way this room was built was like slender booth. And the same game had 5 commentators on it: English, French, Spanish, Italian, Mandarin, all sat next to each other, all commentating in a totally different way. English commentators are extremely reserved compared to the Spanish ones. They're like, go
Right.
on, go on, go on, go on.
Yeah.
That's just not us at all. It's not what we do. But it was incredible. And so we were all sat there, and we all had these microphones with little switches on them, because if you weren't speaking, you had to let the switch go, because otherwise it would pick up the sound from everyone
Right.
else. I've never experienced that anywhere else, but it was just the sheer massive games that they were doing. And so that's the way it was. It was a bonkers few years, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So
That's
wouldn't swap away
incredible.
at all.
That's incredible. I didn't even know that was something that existed. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So now you've commentated on matches, as we brought up in your introduction, for TNT Sport. Paramount Plus is where most people have recently heard from North America, where I am. You've featured also on BBC Match of the Day, if I'm not mistaken, and on TalkSport as well. So you gave us kind of a little bit of insight in how your career started from there. You got into the betting. So how did you make the jump to like the mainstream, we'll say? How did that materialize?
Well, that's a good question. as a commentator, you're basically pitching yourself around, as you are for any freelance job, I'm guessing. I mean, I only have experience in this area, but you're constantly trying to email people, finding out who the people are to speak to at various companies, and you have to kind of have a sense of realism about it. When I was starting out, there was no way I was going to email someone from TNT Sports and say straight away, I should be doing, or can I do games for you? Because it's just not going to happen. You've got to accept that you've got to build yourself up and do things like this. And so, yeah, it's just a case of seeing what was out there. I started doing loads of volleyball commentary actually for quite a long time. I think Olympiacos are one of those multi-sport clubs out there that have various different other sports sectors and things like this. I don't think I ever did Olympiacos, but I used to go to Turkey a lot. It went to Istanbul kind of 8 or 10 times a year at one point. A lot of Russia, Germany, Poland is massive for it. So I actually started diversifying and doing different sports, and through that you meet different people. I ended up doing the Olympics in Rio. And so doing so many different things, you meet so many different people who maybe they're working at the Olympics, but actually their day-to-day job is in football back home. And they'll be like, oh, when we get home, just speak to so-and-so and mention me, and, you should be able to get games for them, whatever. Just these kind of things, you make connections, and ultimately it pushes you in different directions. I started doing games at TalkSport initially. I think that was the first place that I started working at after where I'd started. And that was just on a recommendation. And then that was just for the international service, actually, because I think they broadcast radio commentaries of Premier League games on Sirius in the States. And from that kind of morphed into the domestic TalkSport radio station that we have here in the UK. So yeah, one thing just always leads to another. And yeah, you're just constantly trying to climb the ladder, but there are so many established and quite frankly better people ahead of me in the pecking order that you just have to bide your time. It's a hugely frustrating business, but I think season upon season, as long as you see progression and you're quite happy with what you're doing, because that's the way that you see yourself getting better, when you're getting better gigs and better games. So yeah, that's the way it is. But it's just about connections and speaking to people. That's what it comes down to.
I would disagree with that latter part because I think your delivery is fantastic.
Okay.
As somebody who we recently just podcast format, talking to people, live show, your delivery is fantastic. I never hear you stutter. I don't hear things that I'm very
I
critical
certainly
about
hear myself
about.
stutter, so maybe I'm too self-critical, but yeah.
Well, so do you practice? Do you have to practice your live delivery? Do you practice that to eliminate that? I'm just out of curiosity.
I wouldn't say I practice my delivery. I always have. So we'll talk about this later, I imagine. But when I prepare my notes for a game, I always type it because my handwriting isn't good enough. But I always have a rough scripted intro for when the teams are walking out the tunnel, team news, that kind of thing. So I practice that in the lead up to kickoff to make sure there are no typos or make sure it flows nicely and all that kind of thing. But no, I don't really practice it. I mean, as I said, when they started and they were saying my accent was too strong, I then consciously, not necessarily changed my voice, but made sure that the vowel soundings weren't too controversial, and things like that. But now it's not really a thing that I think about. I just do it without thinking, and yeah. But I
You're
always
referring
try and
to
see football commentary through the prism of being a fan of that club. There are people that sometimes say, like, maybe to you, Burnley against Sheffield United isn't a massive game, but to the fans of those clubs, it's huge. And for them, every goal is probably going to be huge. So you should treat it as being huge. There's obviously levels, like you can't totally lose it because this isn't a Champions League final. This isn't a World Cup final. It's a regular league game. But at the same time, you have to kind of see and appreciate what it is for a fan. So that's the way I always kind of see it, really, and try and inject the excitement in it from that point of view.
what you were mentioning, like rounding out your vowels. Are you referring to when they told you to tone down the accent? Is that what
Well,
you
they
were?
said the way it was put to me was that the way I spoke, sentences ended on a high note. And so I'd be like, this is how they said it to you. They'd be like, oh, I've had a great chat with Ari on the podcast today. And it sounds like you haven't finished a sentence. So actually, they wanted me to say, I had a great time chatting with Harry on the podcast today.
Right.
Cut. And so basically, it was more things like that. But yeah, the accent from where I grew up was very much, oh, what a great time chatting with Harry on the podcast today. Oh, it was great, wasn't it? And my accent wasn't that strong. I'm exaggerating it a bit, but there were certain sounds within it that to them didn't sound particularly palatable. So yeah, it was a case of changing it. But a lot of people now, if I speak to them around London, will ask where I'm from, and then if I tell them, you know, where my background is, they'll be like, oh yeah, I can slightly hear it or something like that, but it's certainly not recognisable. You know, I've lived down here for over 10 years now, so it's changed. But yeah, that was the sticking point to begin with.
That's crazy. Yeah, I'm only familiar with the accent now, having started to do this, and now we've met a lot. I've met a lot of people from England, from everywhere around in the UK, and actually one of our co-hosts is from the UK. And because some of the individuals we've met also from Nottingham Forest fans, I've gotten used to a lot of different accents now
Okay.
in the UK. So in the last couple of years, I've become a little bit more familiar with it.
Yeah,
So,
but I don't know how much I'm reading into that and how much people who are listening in different countries would recognize it. You know, sometimes I see clips of MLS games, right, on Apple, right, on Apple TV, and I can't distinguish American accents on air at all. So maybe I'm thinking too much into it, or maybe they even thought too much into it. I don't know, but
I would
yeah,
say they are, because I like before I met with Costa, my co-host, and before I was introduced to various fans across the UK, I never noticed it. So I would say that probably, yeah, they were overthinking it, at least to me. But that's a different story. Now, you kind of talked a little bit about how you prepare for matches, and I wanted to ask you about what your complete match day routine is. When you prepare for match day coverage, you talked about how you set up, you get your information, and I wanted to learn more about what is there. Do you do the same thing when you approach every match? Is there a specific routine you do? What do you do?
sit right there 1 second.
I'm very excited for this.
On my laptop, I have files and folders for every league. So if I've done a team and I've got their kind of core bits of information, a little bit of history, what they've done this season in different competitions, what they did last season, little bio on the manager, that kind of thing. But that's kind of, you know, that doesn't really change game to game. So I keep that on every single team. And then I basically have the same template that I do for every single match. This is the second leg, right? That was in Budapest. Let's see if you can see that there. Let's bring it in a bit closer. There. So basically, I kind of split my page into two. Across the top, kind of have the coach and a little bit of information, all the kind of recent results. And it's all color coded, so it's really easy to decipher. All the players, kind of key information about them. I highlight the starters in green and the pink are the subs. And then it's all kind of written out in formation at the bottom. Blue denoting captain, yellow cards, obviously, and then when they get subbed, they get crossed out. And then I have a second page, which is more team specific. So kind of all the top scorers, again, all the kind of competitions, all the stats. We get loads of stats, like UEFA upload these amazing stat packs onto their website, which are really helpful because some things are just really sometimes time consuming, let's put, to kind of research for. So, you know, they can just give you loads of information that's not easily readily available elsewhere. I've got kind of their, let's put this in there, their kind of league record, their upcoming fixtures at the bottom, and then a bit of information on their previous meetings, and then in the green, information about the stadium. You know, you never quite know when maybe there's going to be a stoppage because there's been a flare let off, or because there's been an incident, and maybe you start getting pictures and shots of the fans, or just, you know, a drone shot of the stadium or something, and you can say, oh, we're in this district of Budapest, or, you know, this stadium was built just 2 years ago and has a capacity of this, blah, blah, blah. So just kind of a bit of information on everything, and then kind of have all the kind of numbers for all the players here, ages, exact number of minutes they've played in different competitions, and then just kind of overflow stuff here. Kind of records in Europe, stuff like that, best wins, biggest defeats, that kind of thing. And then this is my page that I use for before a match. So when the teams get announced, I can write down the changes here. So yeah, I think Olympiacos made 4 changes for the second leg. And then I've kind of got their lineups here from their last league game and from the first leg as well. And the same for Ferencvaros. And then this is my kind of intro when the broadcast starts, normally kick off -5, just to kind of set up the game, say a bit about each side, what it means for them. And yeah, so basically my week is kind of consisted of putting this together for every single match I do. So a lot of my kind of Monday to Friday is sat in front of a laptop, and then, well, I guess with this being a Thursday game, it's slightly different, but generally, you know, if I'm doing a match on a Saturday or Sunday, you go out and do the game then. But yeah, I generally put together these packs, and depending on whether the team is an English-speaking team or not, it can be slightly different in terms of preparation. Okay, and then I said, or maybe a team that's from a country that has a completely different script and maybe doesn't use A to Z in the alphabet like
Yes.
a lot of, okay. And so then you have a different challenge, and I've faced that a lot with doing teams from Arabic countries in the past, obviously. And you're then kind of reading text from right to left instead of left to right, and it all gets a little bit confusing. But that's part of the fun, I guess. But yeah, to be honest, the variety is what makes it so interesting for me, because I do so many different leagues and competitions that you're constantly going backwards and forwards.
Right.
So that's what I like about it. But yeah, that's how I basically do it. There's a lot of color coding, a lot of highlighting, and a lot of writing down and scribbling as the game goes on. But that's the basics of it, basically. So yeah.
That's incredible. Now, regarding, you said you get some nice stat packs, data packs from UEFA. Do you use any other platforms? Like we use Y Scout to do some football analysis. Do you guys
Yeah,
use any other platforms?
there are colleagues of mine actually who've got a subscription to Y Scout. I'm not at that level of kind of needing that kind of thing, but I think if you're doing the same teams a lot and you can really drill down into their data and maybe have the time to watch past matches of theirs and that kind of thing, great. I use Soccerway a lot for all my normal data. That's where I get it from, because it covers every single league around the world, not just top divisions, second and third divisions. In England's case, it has data all the way down to like the 7th tier, something like that. Youth football, women's football, sorry. So yeah, it's got a bit of everything. There are flaws in the database, the same as Transfermarkt, which a lot of people use. There are big chunks missing, and you just have to know when those chunks are likely to be missing, and you kind of have to go cross-reference elsewhere. But yeah, it's a bit of a combination of Soccerway, Transfermarkt. For the Premier League, they give us 30-page stat packs for every single game, which are game specific, and there's a lot of time and a lot of thought that have gone into them. You know, like it might say, oh, I'm trying to think, Pep Guardiola coached player X when he was a kid at Barcelona at the age of 16 or something like this, where, okay, you might have seen he was at Barcelona, but you might not have made the connection that Guardiola was his coach or something like that. So yeah, you get some really bespoke stuff like that. And then Opta are the main stats company here that provide loads of stuff like that for every game as well. So yeah, there's a combination. It's just a case of kind of pulling everything together, going down other avenues that you might have thought of yourself, and in my case, trying to squeeze it all onto one page. So I took the executive decision back in October to downsize my text size by 1, so I could squeeze a bit more onto the page. So this looked very different back in 2011 when I started, but yeah, it kind of evolves year on year, basically. So there's always little slight tweaks and changes that I make, but essentially it's the same kind of thing that's written down.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You're a lot more organized than I am. I'll give you that much. So I like it. Now moving on to, I guess, your coverage, going back to the first team you covered. Which team was the first that you ever covered in sports commentary?
I think it was September 2011, and I'm pretty sure it was a Serie B game in Italy between Regina or Reggiana. I get mixed up because they both exist in Italy, and a team called Grosseto. And yeah, that was it. I have absolutely no recollection of that game whatsoever, but I remember it. I remember that's what it was, and Yeah, I mean, back then we used to do multiple games in one day. Occasionally now I'll do two in the same day, maybe like a lunchtime kickoff and then an evening game if they're both from a studio instead of, being at a stadium or whatever. But sometimes we do three games in a day. I reckon my record must have been four. I reckon I did four at once. But now if I do two, I'm exhausted by the end of it. But back then it was normal for us to do that. I saw one of my old colleagues only a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about it. And just in disbelief that we used to do that, really, because
It seems like too much.
yeah, I
Can't believe you
mean,
did
I
that.
was
That's
no way.
crazy.
There's no way I was doing this level of research. I can tell you that when you're doing that many games. But I think it was more a structure of how we got paid at the time. They wanted you to commit to so many games or something like that. But
Right.
that was it. But yeah, I could never do that now. It's my body just isn't capable of it, and my voice would be on its last legs by the end of game two. So yeah, that's the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I never thought you could do more than one, so that just blew my mind a little bit. That's kinda nuts.
Well, London's a
When
big place, but it's also a small place, especially because
uh,
public transport here is so good. So you can get across town if you need to between, certain matches or whatever. So yeah, it does help, I guess.
yeah, that's true. I wouldn't know what good public transport's like. I'm here in the States. So
Okay.
unfortunately, especially where I am in, near DC, I'm actually about an hour north. We do not have great public transportation, so it's a little bit foreign concept to me.
Okay.
Now, moving things over to Greek football, when was the first time you encountered Greek football? Was it with Olympiacos or was it with somebody else?
No, the first game I did, apparently, according to my notes, I looked back last night. It was October 2013, and it was PAOK against Panathinaikos. Marcus Berg and Miroslav Stock both scored. That was the first game I did in Greek football, and then the first Olympiacos game um, was a month later, and it was also against PAOK, and Olympiacos won 4-0 apparently. Kostas Mitroglou, Javier Saviola, David Fuster, and Joel Campbell all scored. Some blasts from the past there, but yeah, that was my first encounter, I guess. So a happy day for you guys.
Oh, it was. It was. Now, were those matches you got to see at the stadium, or were you covering from a studio?
No, no, it's definitely in London. Um, yeah, I mean, that was part of the initial positives and negatives, I guess, of doing those games for the bookmakers' websites is that we were all doing them all off tube from London. So you could put your headphones on and turn up the crowd noise as high as possible to try and immerse yourself in it, because you really have to. You sometimes fall into a trap off tube of just speaking at a relatively normal kind of level, because if you're at a Premier League game which is incredibly loud and there's 60,000 people there, you almost have to lift your voice to battle against the crowd. But
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, when they're doing it from a studio, they like to turn up the sound effects just so they can kind of replicate what it would be like being in a stadium. But yeah, I was definitely off tube for that one, sadly.
So, when was the first time you made it to a stadium for a match? In
I
Greece, or
think
did you ever go to Greece for a match?
I've only been to one match in Greece, and that was the Olympiacos Wolves game in the Europa League in 2020. I did start going to games in that first year. I was doing commentary in the FA Cup here, but yeah, I remember it was when COVID really started to take hold, and I think the game had been scheduled. It was obviously a two-legged game, and I think maybe that must have been the first leg away from home at Olympiacos. And then I think there were meant to be fans, and then it got decided there were going to be no fans.
Right.
But some Wolves fans still went and ended up watching it in an Irish bar in the middle of the city. And then the media, for some reason, was still allowed to travel.
Yes.
And I remember being gutted because I was so looking forward to the atmosphere, especially because the press area at the Karaskakis is at the end of the ultras, so you're
Yeah.
going to have the best of it basically. But yeah, so I was a bit disappointed about that, but obviously it was out of my control. And then I remember after the game, still sitting in the press box waiting for my colleague to finish doing his report, and it was announced that Mikel Arteta had got COVID. And about 20
I
minutes
remember that.
previously, the Premier League had issued a statement, I think it was, and said that, we understand what's happening with COVID, but we're going to plough on. We're going to try and carry on with this. And then it got announced literally 20 minutes later that Arteta had got COVID. And then the Premier League were like, right, we need to suspend things. It stopped. And everything kind of came to a halt. And then I was at Athens Airport the next day waiting to board my flight. And within about 30 minutes, I got about 5 emails that just completely cleared my diary. Every single game I had was cancelled. And so it was a very uncertain flight back to Gatwick after that. But yeah, that was my only experience of Greek football, and it was kind of a memorable one for weird reasons, really. I don't think it was a memorable game, was it? I think Pedro Neto scored a deflected equaliser from a free kick or something. But yeah, and I remember getting a taxi down there, and we went for a drink in the port afterwards. But it was just very eerie and not the atmosphere that we were all looking forward to at all, sadly.
So, yeah, because that was going to be a question I had comparing, because you've gotten to see so much football from so many different places. I was curious how the atmosphere for one of these games, maybe you even have something that you've seen through the studio, how you can compare the atmospheres of the Karaiskaki Stadium versus others.
It's hard to say because I haven't been there with fans, but
Right.
the thing I love about maybe the leagues that don't have the glitz and the glamour of maybe La Liga or Serie A or the Premier League is the sheer passion. And I don't know if that's kind of a consequence of the glitz and the glamour in some of the other leagues or not. I mean, you certainly still have the passion in Italy. I don't watch so much Spanish football at the moment, so I can't really compare. But it's the one thing that the Premier League is massively lacking, really. Again, it's partly down to English people being far more reserved than maybe some of the countries the further east you go in Europe. But I'm massively jealous of it. I mean, I honestly absolutely love it. I mean, when I used to go and do these volleyball matches, if there was ever a team playing, a night either side, I would stop and go to their game. I mean, I used to go and watch Fenerbahce, Galatasaray, and even when Wolves played Besiktas in the Europa League in that same season, the ground was no more than half full. And I swear all those Turkish fans go to whistling school because they whistle like no one else I've ever experienced before. But I just love the intensity that you get in those stadiums. I went on a stadium tour of the Maracanã at Belgrade for Red Star, and it just reeks of football. Like you can just tell what the games are like, and that's another game that I would love to go to later down the line. But yeah, I mean, I'm massively jealous of it, and I wish England could kind of create it. And there are clubs that are trying to develop their kind of ultras section, but it's just not quite the same. Like it's not really what English football fans do. Like it's not the same culture in that way. People just go to the pubs and then roll into the ground at 5-3. That's what happens. It's not quite as organised as it is in some of the other countries that have them. But yeah, it's certainly something I would love to see over here. But I think we're probably past the point of no return now.
Now,
I don't know how
specifically
you see it in
looking,
reverse.
well, so with the way we kind of look at it, and it's changing for us now too. Like look at all the regulations and the crackdowns that are happening in Greece. The with that, sometimes, especially when you don't have a lot of rules surrounding it or enforcement of those rules, more importantly, you get the bad with the good, right? You get the violence, you get the lasers on people, and so it's a balancing act with that, right? And I think the more exposure leagues get, the more they make it to the mainstream, especially to other countries. Unfortunately, whether it takes away from the atmosphere or not, by default, that has to come down. Because if people ever want to go to those games, you then don't start to feel safe. And that's something that you have to figure out how to parse one from the other, because unfortunately with one comes the other in many respects. And that's something that's no longer acceptable in England since I would say since the days, what was it, of Margaret Thatcher, when she had the total ban on football. So
Yeah, the one thing that English football does have, that from talking to colleagues who are maybe working here but are from different countries, there's a spontaneity about chanting in England that you don't get in a lot of other countries. Maybe there's a player playing for the opposition who's been in the newspaper headlines that week because of something they've done, rightly or wrongly, and they might get mocked for it at the game, or maybe something's happened in the game and it just, one fan kind of starts a chant and it grows and everyone just starts laughing because there's either kind of sarcasm laced within it or irony or whatever. And that's the one thing I do love about English football that I don't think you get in other countries. You watch I do a lot of Serie A games, and it's a constant noise throughout the game. England's a lot more,
Right.
depending on what might be happening, but you do get these quirky chants that just seem to pop up out of nowhere, and I quite like it. It brings a smile to your face, and sometimes you can bring that into your commentary as well, because maybe fans who are listening at home know the tune of the chant but can't decipher what the words are being said. But as a commentator, you might be able to just take an earphone off and listen to it and be able to kind of bring that in. So I do like that. That's probably one uniqueness about English football, I think.
I do like that. The one that always comes to mind, I remember a friend of mine sending me a video. He was at a stop. It was a Manchester United game. I don't remember what happened, but the fans were they were making fun of Sunderland.
Okay.
And it was like Sunderland's a massive, and then like they're mouthing off all the players' names and like making fun of the team. And he took a video. It killed me. I thought that was hysterical. But
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. We need to get you to learn some Greek, because then you can. There is some spontaneity in the Greek language. Unfortunately, though, it's probably nothing you could use in your commentary, as it tends to be quite
No.
vulgar most of the time. We'll have to one day we'll get you the Babelfish Greek translation live. There'll be some AI for that, I'm sure. Now, kind of honing in just a little bit on Olympiacos before we start to wrap things up. How do you and your colleagues, or maybe even the network of sports commentary in UK, how do they view Olympiacos and the Greek league, like in a general sense? Forget culture, but in terms of the product, the football product, and is it just a small league? I mean, we get anytime we play British teams, we always get fans from the other side. Greece is a backwater league, this and that. But what is the commentary sense about the Greek league and the Balkan leagues?
Do you know the thing that brings it into everyone's minds is basically, and again, rightly or wrongly, if there's an incredible pyro or there are loads of flares, or there's basically something that's different to England, right? And they're like, oh my goodness, did you see the game between Olympiacos and Panathinaikos? Did you see what the fans did before the game? And there's loads of these kind of fan accounts on Twitter and different social media that kind of push it out there, and it's the kind of thing that gets retweeted around, and everyone's like, "This is incredible! Imagine if it was like this here." But sadly, there's no rights deal to watch Greek football here, so
Right.
I think at the moment we're kind of at obviously English, French, Italian, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and I don't even think you can watch Belgian or Dutch anymore. I don't think. Used to be. Don't think so at the moment. So in terms of visibility, it's next to none, to be honest, because you just can't watch it here. And so it only really comes to the forefront if one of the Greek teams are playing one of the English teams in European competition. And I don't know which Greek team has kind of got the furthest in the Champions League in recent times. I'm presuming Olympiacos, unless you correct me otherwise. But
2 years ago, PAOK went to the quarterfinals of Conference League, and they got knocked out. But other than that, it's been Olympiacos. Panathinaikos back in the 80s went to a European final, but that was before, I think, even professional football existed in Greece. So, but yeah, there's been a couple of quarterfinal appearances here and there from both Olympiacos and Panathinaikos in like the old format, but especially the last like 10 years, it's just been Olympiacos.
Yeah. So it's quite hard, really. And it's quite hard to put a value on where the kind of league is at. I mean, actually, you do get a bit of back and forth, don't you? I mean, Daniel Podence has obviously gone back to you guys, having had a spell at Wolves. Johnny, who was part of the same Wolves team with Daniel Podence, has gone to PAOK, I think it is. I think he joined them in the January window. So It's hard to say where you would place it in terms of quality, really, because there just isn't enough games to kind of judge it by. I mean, I'm obviously taking your word for it that since Mendeleev has come in, then things have greatly improved for you
Yes.
guys. But it's really hard to put a point on where it is. People obviously have respect for it, and the clubs as institutions as well, because, as I say, when you only need to look at like videos and pictures of the stadium on a match day to understand how big a club is and what it means. But beyond that, it's quite hard to put a value on, to be honest.
Yeah. And when you first were speaking on kind of how sometimes media or fan accounts focus on like the pyro and the atmosphere, I remember we had put a graphic out for our first leg against West Ham. And the first thing, like, it was like a couple days before, maybe a day before. And I had put a graphic together and it's like smoky clouds. It looks like there's like a kind of like a red skull in the sky. And it says, "You're not in England anymore." And the Mirror picked that up in England. And they're like, "This is the atmosphere English clubs go into." Us like, it's just a graphic.
Yeah.
It just made me think of that for
And
some
in
reason.
comparison, I don't know if you saw last night, Brighton played Roma in the Europa League, and in the first
Yes,
leg of the Olympico, Roma fans had put a fairly derogatory banner up about the Queen.
I saw that.
And did you see the riposte last night? Did you see what
I
they came
did.
back with?
I
Totti
saw
loves
the
pineapple on a pizza. I mean, that's
yeah.
one way to rile the Italian fans up. But yeah, I'm afraid that's as good as the English fans have generally got. So yeah, there we are. That's the difference.
So my last question for you will be, and we were talking about kind of exposure, and we obviously we know there's not much exposure to the Greek league. The Greek league does a for me, it does a terrible job of one trying to connect to other countries, marketing itself. But you do in the UK have exposure to some ownership, Greek ownership. Vagelos Marinakis, the president of Olympiakos, owns Nottingham Forest, who are, for lack of a better term, our sister club under the same ownership. So you do have some exposure to what Greek ownership can look like. So how does he look? How does he appear to you and to the sports commentary in UK, that network? How does he appear? How does he compare to like other Premier League owners?
Well, I
Can
think
you compare and
he's
contrast?
in a way he's relatively similar, because I don't know if it's different for you guys in Greece with Olympiacos, but he doesn't do many interviews. I can't even picture him doing a single interview with Nottingham Forest at all, to be honest. I mean, he brought himself pitch side the other week, which didn't go down too well with plenty of onlookers after a game where they thought particularly hard done by the referee. Um, but I don't think he speaks much. I don't know if that's different for Olympiacos or not. Does he put himself out there? I'm not sure.
I mean, here and there, it's mainly there's well, it's not him. There's statements that come out from the club, but he usually shows up. He comes to like some big game. Anytime he's in Greece, he'll come to the games. He might say something to media here and there. If
Okay,
things are really good, you'll hear from him. Also, if things are really bad, you'll hear from him.
okay. But I can't. I mean, I like to think I'm across generally a broad spectrum of English football. I can't remember him doing an interview. I'll have to check. But so in a way, he's quite similar to the other owners, because most of the other owners don't really speak.
Right.
And a fair amount of them aren't on the ground with their teams either, because they might be American or they might be Chinese, as the case is with a couple of clubs as well. So maybe they're not kind of there day to day to kind of run things as you might get with lower league clubs. There was there were a lot of headlines the other week when he appointed a referee analyst, Mark Clattenburg, who used to be one of the Premier League's best refs. And they brought him in an advisory role now, and people are generally a bit confused as to why they've done that or what they hope to get from that. So it's hard to know what to make of that. Held on to his manager, Steve Cooper, for a very long time when people thought he might have gone in previous months. So, there was a fair amount of stability, and they did bring in a huge amount of players when they got promoted. But Nottingham Forest have been out of the Premier League for such a long time that I think it's totally understandable that Marinakis wanted to, give them the best chances possible. And if he felt that was the way of doing it, then so be it. I mean, it's his club; he can do what he wants. So it'll be interesting to see how they go forward, because there are continued rumours and reports that they're going to be hit by the PSNR regulations in
Right.
terms of what they spent, and they are just hovering above the relegation zone at the moment. So that might be something for them to worry about in the coming months. But for now, they're kind of just about holding their own with Nuno as the boss. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know really to have much of an opinion on Marinakis because no one really knows him as a person or what his kind of general personality is. You can only judge him by the acquisitions and the recruitment that he does. But I don't know whether the news of the referee analyst made headlines back in Greece or where you are or anything like that. But for English people watching on, it was a bit of a strange thing to do because no one else does this kind of thing.
So the juxtaposition between how he is at Forest and how he is in Greece is kind of entertaining for us in a way. I will say this: you do see, at least for us, of the things that we've seen, you do see kind of like his passion because at Olympiacos, he's an owner that is 100% a fan too. He's been a fan of the club forever. His family has been very close to Olympiacos for a long time. And he's a fan. He gets very emotional about games, win or lose. And he does the same at Nottingham Forest as well. There, I remember we saw the picture of he had broken a TV at one point. There was a loss. He like threw his ID card, and somebody found his ID card in a bush. And he brings that emotion with him because he wants to win. He's a fan first before he's an owner. And so we see that from here regarding the refs. In Greece, in the culture he grew up in Greece, we have the relationship that fans here and people have with our referees is not the same that you have there. Referees here don't have the respect that you guys give them in England, and the protection, we'll say, in many ways. But here, there's just such a bad history involving corruption in the past with referees and such a mistrust of officiating here. And so him appointing, the way I see it, at least, him appointing a referee consultant or a referee analyst like Clattenburg, who, by the way, he was the head of officiating here for a while, for a few years, and appointing him, in England, he's not going to make statements about the referees, kind of like how Olympiacos does here. So he's a good businessman, and he understands the landscape around him. In England, he can't. It's not appropriate to do the same things that he does in Greece. How we talk about the refs, how clubs make statements about each other. The culture is just different. So the only thing he can do there is, if he's going to internalize the situation, the only thing he can do, he can't scream at the refs. He can't yell at the Premier League. No one's going to do anything for him. So the only thing he can do is maybe hire somebody that can help him understand what refs will do what, so that they can prepare on that aspect from it. That's the only way I see, why that could happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Bit of a
I did
cultural
read.
difference.
I did read. I think a couple of comments on Twitter saying it'd be the kind of thing that would happen in Greece, but to try and do this in England is, it's only going to get you so far. And the slightly funny thing is that there's a TV series here called Gladiators. I don't know if you've come across it before. But basically there's kind of a perceived elite group of people, and then contestants go on to try and beat them at a number of challenges, get a certain number of points, and then get to the end of the show, and then it's you, the other contestant, and you kind of have to go through this huge assault course to get to the end. The winner goes through, etc. And Clattenburg's the referee on it, and
yeah, that's like American Gladiators. It used to be. I don't think it's active here anymore, but it used to be a huge show here.
yeah, it was a massive show here in the 90s, and they brought it back at the start of this year. And I've done a really good remake of it. Actually, it's quite fun to watch because it has all the kind of bits and pieces they used to have in the 90s that could have been left out in the present day, but it's still got it. But there was an iconic referee back at the start in the 90s called John Anderson, and now Clattenburg has taken over the gig. So
that's crazy.
It was weird that he was doing that, and then out of the blue, it's like Nottingham Forest have appointed Mike Clattenburg as referee on this, and he has done one interview so far. He was collared in the tunnel by the BBC after a game recently, so I thought he might come in and just do his job but not be a public face. But he is talking, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes on. I've got one question for you. I understand you had one of my colleagues doing the last two legs of your Conference League game. So you've had kind of experience now of two different English commentators in the knockout round. how does English-speaking commentary compare to Greek commentary in terms of the differences, the content differences, the passion, everything like that? What's the
So I would compare, like, you brought up like Spanish commentary before with kind of like how emotional they get, or like they that's the Greek commentary. I don't think is there, but like it's a little bit more like you get more, I think, a little bit more emotion out of that in that respect. But on a whole, I mean, maybe it's because I speak Greek, I speak English. Maybe because English is my first language, I prefer like English commentary. But I also, because there's some commentators in Greece where it's like their bias and their partisanship like really shows, and I
okay?
don't, okay, when they're Olympiacos, when they're covering Olympiacos, and it's whatever. But when it's a bigger match, I prefer somebody more neutral. But so in that respect, I prefer like the English commentary because I feel like it's better, more neutral. But it's more for Greece. It's more dependent on the individual. But
Okay.
generally, you'll get more like emotion out of them because they're usually like more fans of whoever they're covering.
But is more or less information given by the commentator, or is it more just kind of play by play? Is there
Less
much time for anything in between? Are Greek fans interested in the kind of data and statistics behind it, or is it not like that?
they the they'll give some information here and there if it like maybe historical here and there, but very rarely do they focus on like data, or at least data like we do on our show. Like nobody except for one outlet that doesn't really do sports commentary does in Greece, but nobody really is real hard focused in the data like that, unfortunately.
Okay. No, I mean, you say unfortunately it's different for different countries. I know, here and obviously where you're based in the States as well, like data is
It's
increasingly,
king.
especially in
It's
American
king.
sports, but it's kind of in
Yeah.
football, it's only getting more and more and more at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, I think football's a slightly harder sport to pin on data because
100%.
there's
It's
there's
more
so many.
fluid
It's
game.
looking at like XG for example. It doesn't
Right.
I like it as a statistic because I hate the word deserved in football. I hate that as a phrase because it just doesn't mean anything. But at least with XG, you kind of get somewhere close to where
Right.
the team has been. But obviously, it can't kind of cater for emotion or state of mind or tension or anything like that. And so I think data kind of gets you so far in football, but it's obviously not the be all end all. So um, yeah, we're at an interesting place with it at the moment, I think.
I love it because maybe it's because growing up with American sports, I used to do a lot of fantasy football here, and I care about every data point. I care about everything because that's how I measure. That's how I do my picks. So coming and doing, like, I started doing fantasy Premier League for the first time last year, and it was a huge culture shock for me because there's like the way I follow fantasy football here. You can measure like to a step of an individual in some cases, and then coming to the Premier League, seeing how they measure points and everything, and it's just completely different because the game is different. So you can't measure everything to a T yet. It'll happen at some point, but in some ways I prefer it that way. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, even we're going very off topic here, but even like possession as a thing,
Right.
it's not so much now, but it still gets cited a lot. Oh, they've won even though they only had 37% possession, this kind of thing. But possession's actually like measured as a data statistic as passes completed. It's you could
Yeah.
hold on to the ball for half an hour, but if you've only completed one pass in that time and the other team has completed 100, then it's not going to be representative of actually holding onto the ball. Do you know what I mean? It's
Right. Exactly. I love it
so
all. My favorite lately is like the pressing, like measurements of the pressing intensity, PPDA, and
okay.
other various like the measurements of average distance, like formation line distance. I love all of that. I go nuts for it.
It's very generational here. I mean, if you went and sat in the main stand at a lot of Premier League games and mentioned PPDA to them, it would just be like just like either no idea or no interest or a combination of the two. So yeah, it's very much a young person's thing, I think.
Yeah, it is, for sure. Um, James, we're going to wrap up really quickly, but as we do with all of our guests, we have a quick fire round that we do. It's very fast. A few questions I'll ask you, and then just the first thing that comes to your mind, just something that we can, use to better get to know you. So the first question we'll ask is, what's your favorite food?
Pizza. So many different ways, so many different types. Love it.
Oh, okay. I think it's the first time we've gotten pizza. Favorite movie or show, or favorite movie and show. Sorry.
Favorite series of movies, the James Bond films. Very British, but love them, and actually prefer the older ones compared to the new ones, which is probably controversial with some people. But yeah, that for the films. And TV as an English comedy series called Only Fools and Horses, with a very famous actor called David Jason, set around a dodgy market trader and his son and his granddad. It's very, very funny. And yeah, it's a series which is iconic here and kind of is often said as being the greatest comedy ever in this country. But it also has a very strange pickup in Serbia. They're obsessed with it there as well. I think it was shown on Serbian TV without dubbing when they were younger. So yeah, it bizarrely has a strange cultural reference point there. There's murals of it on the wall in Belgrade and stuff. Yeah, it's totally bizarre, but yeah, it's my favorite one.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
What about your favorite football related memory?
It would be supporting the team growing up, watching them at Wembley, watching them at the Millennium Stadium, the National Stadium of Wales, when Wembley was being rebuilt, when they played in finals there and semi-finals at Wembley. And to be honest, probably overall that European season they had in the Europa League under Nuno with Wolves, because got to go on some great trips, some great cities. And I know the Champions League is the top thing, but in a way I love the Europa League and the Europa Conference League because you go to real Europe. So many people go to Barcelona and Madrid and all of these other places that have amazing teams that are consistently in the Champions League. But when you're going to places like Bratislava, Braga, I love that trip to Athens, even though it was slightly different. I'd never been there before, so I was looking forward to it. And Istanbul, which we're very. I appreciate this is a quick fire. I'm going off topic a bit. Istanbul for us is like just too far to be a long weekend in England.
Right.
You can get to most places around Europe within a 2-hour flight, right? But Istanbul's 3.5. Time difference as well. It kind of eats into the weekend. So I loved going there to watch Wolves play there. But yeah, probably overall that European season was the big memory.
Absolutely, I understand that. Well, Olympiacos is going to be going to Istanbul for the quarterfinals. We're going to be playing against Fenerbahce, so we'll be back there once again.
The Asian side is the best side of Istanbul. I absolutely love it. So that'll be quite a night.
It will, for sure. James, thank you so much for joining us. It was an incredible interview. You gave so many insights, so many things I never considered in the field of sports commentary. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. It was a fantastic interview. We really appreciate your time.
No, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for your help again, because it was invaluable. We always look for someone like you to help us, because sometimes you just need that extra bit of something. And if anyone ever has any questions or anything, they can find me on Twitter and stuff, and I'll happily answer anything they want to know. So thanks very much.
Of course. What are your handles on the various social media so they can follow you?
So everyone can see my name there, and just put an underscore between the two names and they'll find me. James_Fielden.
Fantastic. And James, you can always reach out to us. Anything related to Olympiacos, we're glad to talk Olympiacos in any way, shape, or form. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed the latest interview for the Patreon community. This is Gate 7 International by the fans for the fans, and we'll see you next time.